Today on the Matt Walsh Show, in just a few months in office, President Trump has shown that it is possible to shut down the border and protect our country, despite what every president in my lifetime has claimed. This is actually a simple problem to solve. Also, we'll have my instant reaction to the Supreme Court upholding our law in Tennessee banning child gender transition drugs and surgeries. And some Republicans want to sell off federal land, millions of acres of it, to build housing. I'll explain why I'm against that plan. Plus, Democrat theater kids in Congress are officially out of control. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. In a world where traditional values are under attack, the Candle Club is America's premier conservative candle company. My all-new scent, Uncharted, is here. It's got a strong woodsy scent meant for blazing trails that make even trips from the couch to the fridge an expedition. Go to thecandleclub.com/Walsh today to get yours. That's thecandleclub.com/Walsh to get the Uncharted candle today. Being a husband, father, and host of my own show means life never slows down. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and vegetables every day. Sounds miserable and time-consuming. Frankly, I just don't want to do all that. I'd rather go get something deep-fried and unhealthy sometimes. But with Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and vegetables every day with 31 different whole fruit and vegetable ingredients. Balance of Nature takes fruits and vegetables, they freeze-dry them, turn them into a powder, and then put them in a capsule. You take your fruit and veggie capsules every day, and then your body knows what to do with them. Go to balanceofnature.com and use promo code Walsh for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Walsh. Looking back on it, one of the most important moments from the last election had nothing to do with Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. In fact, it had nothing to do with this country at all. It was the unilateral decision by the president of El Salvador to transform his country virtually overnight from a gang-controlled, failed state into one of the safest places on the planet. This was not an empty campaign promise or just some slogan. He actually did it, despite the wailing from various civil liberties groups. In 2015, El Salvador recorded more than 6,000 homicides. Throughout all of last year, they recorded just over 100 homicides. So by all accounts, in just a few years, El Salvador managed to solve a crime problem that, according to all the experts, could not be solved. To everybody living in America's rotted out urban centers, overrun border towns, and poor communities in Appalachia, the transformation of El Salvador was meaningful. I mean, it wasn't your typical foreign news story with no interest to everyday people. It wasn't the equivalent of wall-to-wall coverage about the latest developments taking place 7,000 miles away in the Middle East. What Bukele did to save El Salvador very clearly sent the message to every American that the same kind of revival is possible in this country. All the barriers you hear about are fake. None of the roadblocks are real. Places like Seattle, New York, Los Angeles, they're not actually beyond saving, no matter how dire the situation looks. All it takes is an executive, a person in a position of leadership, who's willing to punish criminals without any remorse. And once a country has an executive like that, things can change. And they can change very quickly. Less than 6 months into the second Trump administration, we're seeing another illustration of this principle. Throughout the campaign, as you might remember, we were told repeatedly that the unrestricted flow of illegal aliens into this country was a very, very difficult problem to solve, very complicated. We were told that in order to even begin to address the issue, we'd need to pass a law that would send billions of dollars to federal government agencies and various random NGOs. That was the claim every Democrat and a bunch of Republicans were making. And as much as I understand that no human being ever wants to hear the words Kamala Harris ever again, this was also a big part of her platform. During the debate, it was her big idea for supposedly fixing the border. So if you can bear it, here is that moment again.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration.
Let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
Less than a year later, let's check in on this whole line of argument. How is the border doing now that Donald Trump is the president of the United States? Without a multi-billion-dollar border bill, how much could his administration possibly have accomplished? Well, turns out, even with every federal judge in the country working in tandem to block his agenda, and even without an expensive border bill passed by Congress, the administration has accomplished quite a bit. They've done what we were told was impossible many times over. The southern border, which until very recently was a completely unsalvageable mess, is now more secure than it's been at any time in generations. Here's CBS News, of all places, reporting on the progress, quote, "The number of migrants crossing the U.S. southern border unlawfully continued to be at a historically low level in April, 3 full months into President Trump's aggressive efforts to curtail illegal immigration, according to internal federal data. The number of illegal crossings during Mr. Trump's first 3 full months in office represented a seismic change at the U.S.-Mexico border. The apprehensions reported in February, March, and April are the lowest tallies recorded by the Border Patrol in its public monthly data set, which stretches back to fiscal year 2000. The last time Border Patrol averaged fewer than 9,000 monthly apprehensions along the southern border over a year was in the late 1960s, according to historical agency figures." So in other words, according to arrest data stretching back 25 years, which is the extent of the data we have collected, a record low number of illegal aliens are currently attempting to cross the border. Donald Trump in his second term has achieved a more secure border than Bush, Obama, and the Trump administration the first time around did. And he's still going. We're on pace for the lowest number of illegal aliens being apprehended at the border since the 1960s, at which point the data becomes so imprecise that we have no real way of going back further than that. And this did not take an act of Congress. It didn't take hundreds of billions of dollars. All it took was an executive who authorized federal officers to enforce the laws that are already on the books, both at the border and throughout the country. And once that happened, the inflow of illegal aliens stopped as quickly as it began. So here's a chart that CBS included in their story, which highlights just how drastic the decline in illegal migration has been. And you'll notice there's a massive, unprecedented spike in illegal immigration right when Joe Biden takes over. And then just as quickly, the Trump administration ends it. You just look at that drop. It's almost unbelievable. And it demonstrates that, no, this was not a complicated issue to solve. And that makes the refusal to solve this problem by every president until now seem all the more nefarious. Now, to be clear, the only reason we're seeing these reductions in apprehensions at the border is because the illegal aliens have gotten the message that the Trump administration is serious about immigration enforcement. And therefore they've stopped trying to enter this country in large part. They understand that when they're caught, they won't be allowed into the United States anymore, which is what the Biden administration did in virtually every case. The New York Post just obtained data demonstrating just how common catch and release used to be under the previous administration. These are some of the more extraordinary figures you'll see. Quote, Border Patrol agents didn't release a single migrant into the U.S. last month. A single one. A staggering drop after the Biden administration allowed 62,000 illegal crossers in the country in May 2024. Agents caught 8,725 migrants crossing illegally at the southern border last month. That's a 93% decrease from May 2024, when 117,905 were nabbed. One of the most monumental policy changes made by Trump was the reversal of President Joe Biden's catch and release scheme, which resulted in millions of illegal border jumpers being allowed into the U.S., close quote. So, to restate, in May of 2024, the Biden administration deliberately allowed 62,000 illegal aliens into the country. That's 62,000 in a month, meaning they were on pace to allow more illegal aliens into this country in 1 year than the entire population of San Francisco. And by contrast, this past May, the Trump administration did not deliberately allow a single detained illegal immigrant into this country. They took the number from 62,000 in a month to 0, which of course is what the number should have been all along. And there's no reason whatsoever to allow a criminal alien to enter the country deliberately, because once you do that, you'll never see them again, at least not until they commit some heinous act of violence against an American citizen. And of course, the Biden administration knew that. That's why they did it. And now that policy is over. And so we are seeing immediate results. And it was as simple as enforcing the laws that are already on the books with the tools that are already available to do it. This is obviously a major victory on par with what Bukele did in El Salvador. But it's not a total victory, even though the numbers make it look like one. And that's because, as we've discussed previously, illegal immigration isn't the only immigration problem we have. And we still have the problem of all the illegal immigrants who are currently in the country. We still need to round up and get rid of. But like other countries, including Canada, we've given legal status to a large number of foreign nationals who despise this country, which means even legal immigration is a problem that also needs to be fixed. In fact, legal immigration needs to be shut down entirely, at least for now. More than pretty much anyone else, Ilhan Omar is a walking justification for a policy like that. And as if to prove my point, Omar recently announced that America, the country that rescued her from a life of poverty and despair and ultimately death in Somalia, is actually one of the worst countries on the planet. This is a woman who, because of the generosity of the United States and its immigration policy, is now a sitting member of Congress, living a life that's unimaginable to many Americans, to say nothing of virtually everyone living in Somalia. But here she is announcing that actually America is just about as bad as where she came from, if not worse. Watch.
I mean, I grew up in a dictatorship. And I don't even remember ever witnessing anything like that. To have a democracy, a beacon of hope for the world to now be turned into one of the worst countries where the military are in our streets without any regard for people's constitutional rights, while our president is spending millions of dollars propping himself up like a failed dictator with a military parade. It is really shocking, and it should be a wake-up call for all Americans to say this is not the country we were born in. This is not the country we believe in. This is not the country our founding fathers imagined. And this is not the country that is supported by our Constitution, our ideals, our values. And we should all collectively be out in the streets rejecting what is taking place this week.
She's willing to say as part of her sob story that she lived under a brutal dictatorship in Somalia, but she conveniently leaves out the fact that her father was a colonel in that dictator's army. This is a regime that committed genocide and various human rights abuses as part of a communist Islamist agenda, but Omar forgot to mention any of that, and it's an interesting omission, to say the least. It's the kind of thing that might make you suspect that Ilhan Omar is an inherently dishonest person, and her whole family and many other refugees like her should have never been granted legal status in this country in the first place. And that's not the only deception that's evident in that interview. Notice what she's doing here. She says that this should be a wake-up call for all Americans to feel a variety of patriotic sentiments about the country we were born in and the founding fathers. She's trying to use American values and American history against Americans, but she doesn't actually share any of those values. She doesn't care about our history. Pretty much every time this woman opens her mouth, she's attacking America, praising Somalia, and vowing to work on behalf of Somali interests from within the United States to undermine the United States. We've played the clips many times before, and there hasn't been a single moment in her political career where she's expressed an ounce of pride in this country, where she said anything positive about it. And she certainly never praised the founding fathers before, who she regards as white supremacists whose statues should be torn down and whose memory should be erased from history forever. But now suddenly she's pretending to invoke the founding fathers to appeal to her constituents. And again, she's been given legal status to come to this country and say all this. She's now a naturalized citizen. And through it all, she keeps talking about Somalia. In fact, she seems to want to go back there. This is a rough translation that's making the rounds from a trip that Omar reportedly took to Somalia back in 2022. We'll play just a small bit of it because it's not in English, but here it is. Watch.
oo ahade qof iyadoo da'yar wadankeedii laga kaxeeyay wili xiise u qabto in maalin wadankeedii ay ku noolaato oo dadkeedii wax ay la wadaagto.
According to the translation in the subtitles, she says, quote, "I am a Somali girl, a young child taken from her country that misses her country and wishes to live there." Close quote. Now, you can dispute whether Ilhan Omar obtained her citizenship lawfully, and whether she's, subject to deportation on those grounds. But it doesn't really matter. Very obviously, based on what she's saying publicly, it's clear that Ilhan Omar should not have been allowed into this country for any reason, illegally or legally. She certainly should not have been made a citizen. She doesn't offer anything to this country. She never has. She hates this country. She always has. She's a shining example for why legal immigration needs to be drastically curtailed now that the border is relatively secure. Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is yet another example. She came to this country from India as a teenager, and by her own admission, at no point did she have any interest in improving America for Americans. Instead, she immediately got to work opening the floodgates for the rest of the third world to come here. And here's what she just wrote on social media, quote, "I came to this country when I was 16. I worked in immigration justice for 20 years before setting foot in Congress. I've spent my entire life defending immigrants, and I'm not backing down." In other words, by allowing Pramila Jayapal to become a citizen, we didn't get someone who was committed to a life of hard work that would improve the lives of American citizens in any way. She didn't have any interest in contributing to her local community or performing services for American citizens. Instead, she began working immediately on behalf of foreign nationals. This is a self-perpetuating problem. It's a death spiral. The more immigrants we allow into this country, even legal ones, the more immigrants we get. And by and large, these people are not vetted. They openly despise, many of them, this country from the second they arrive. We are allowing people into this country who hate it. And after they've used our resources for their benefit, their hatred doesn't change. Instead, they work even harder to allow more of their countrymen into the United States so that they too can reap the rewards. This system simply cannot last forever. It's not simply immoral. It's unsustainable. It only works as long as there are rewards to dish out. And once that happens, and this moment is rapidly approaching, the social safety net collapses for everybody along with our economy. Now, the only way to prevent that outcome is for the Trump administration to follow up on its success with illegal aliens, which is a battle that we're still very much in the middle of. But to follow up with that, on that, by sharply reducing the number of lawful migrants into this country too. Democrats will claim that it's heartless to turn our backs on refugees and so on, but all you really need to do is listen to some of these refugees, quote unquote refugees, and lawful immigrants speak for just a few minutes, and you'll see why it's necessary. I mean, they don't typically sound like South African refugees. Just a few of them were allowed into this country. Very grateful to be here, obviously, waving American flags and all that. Instead, they often sound like Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal. They tell us how awful the U.S. is, how desperately they want to return to a place like Somalia. And at this point, as decisively as Donald Trump closed the southern border, we have no choice but to give these loathsome anti-American foreign operatives exactly what they're asking for. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Here's a fun fact that that'll ruin your next grocery run. Unfortunately, over 85% of the grass-fed beef that you're paying premium prices for, well, it's imported. Congratulations, you've been funding foreign cattle operations while thinking you're supporting American farmers. Just great. But here's the thing. GoodRanchers.com actually gives you what you think you're already buying. Shocking concept, right? 100% American source meat, born here, raised here, harvested here, not shipped from who knows where with mystery ingredients and questionable safety standards. No antibiotics ever, no added hormones, no seed oils, just meat Revolutionary concept, I know. And they deliver it straight to your door for added convenience as well. I enjoy ordering steaks for the family, getting to grill them up on busy weekends. It saves me time. Kids love them. It's delicious stuff. It's a win-win all around. Look, July 4th is coming up. Nothing says celebrating America quite like actually buying American meat for once. Subscribe to any Good Ranchers box today and you'll get free meat for life. That's free Wagyu burgers, hot dogs, bacon, chicken wings in every single box. Plus, use my code Walsh and knock an extra $40 off your order. Visit goodranchers.com. Use my code Walsh for your free meat for life and that extra $40 off. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Okay, I want to start with the very big news today, and I just saw this. This just happened before we started recording, so I plan to do a big monologue on it tomorrow. We'll break it down. We'll get into a lot of detail about it. But I want to at least mention this momentous story before tomorrow, which is that the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of our law in Tennessee banning child mutilation across the state. Here's the Daily Wire's report. The Supreme Court on Wednesday upheld a Tennessee law prohibiting transgender drugs and surgeries for children, a major win for conservative activists and parent groups. The court ruled 6-3 in United States v. Scrimeti that Tennessee's law does not violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Tennessee Attorney General Jonathan Scrimeti defended the law before the High Court in December, saying it was a matter of protecting kids from the consequences of decisions that they cannot fully understand. Chief Justice John Roberts penned the court's opinion and said the plaintiffs contort the meaning of the term medical treatment. Roberts wrote, notably absent from their framing is a key aspect of any medical treatment, the underlying medical concern the treatment is intended to address. Roberts rejected the plaintiff's argument that Tennessee's law discriminates on the basis of sex. He wrote, quote, the law does not prohibit conduct for one sex that it permits for the other. Under SB 1, no minor may be administered puberty blockers or hormones to treat gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, or gender incongruence. Minors of any sex may be administered puberty blockers or hormones for other purposes. That being like actual legitimate medical purposes. So that's the decision. I mean, as I said, a lot more to be said about it and to break down, which we'll do tomorrow. It's a huge win. It's a historic win. The word historic gets thrown around a lot, and I think incorrectly very often. But it really applies here. It applies because this is, I think, the final fatal blow to the gender transition industry. Its last gap, its desperate final chance was to make this ridiculous argument that somehow banning the procedure violates the Constitution, which is absurd because, of course, doing the procedures, inflicting this on children, violates their constitutional rights, violates their human rights. And SCOTUS didn't go that far, but they went far enough. They went as far as they needed to, finding that states do have the right to pass these kinds of laws, regulating and banning these procedures. Of course they do. Of course they do. And, so you look at this, and I think back to 3 years ago with our investigation into Vanderbilt's child mutilation practices, and we followed that up with our big rally in the state capitol to end child mutilation. And then our lawmakers followed that up with this law banning this butchery, which finds its way to the Supreme Court. And many other states followed suit. There were a couple of states that already had laws like these on the books, even before we did in Tennessee. And now the Supreme Court. And it's funny because trans activists for the last few years have been so confident. They've been so confident that the courts will bail them out. Trans activists who rather infamously have trouble dealing with reality in many different ways. And they also could not cope with the reality of the fact that they're losing the argument. And state after state passing these laws, and yet you'd still hear from trans activists saying, "Oh, the courts will save us," right? Because they're the damsels in distress, or they wish they were damsels in distress, and the courts are their knight in shining armor that's always there to save them. And because that's how it's been for left-wing activists for a long time. Right? The courts have always bailed them out. So in some ways, you can't blame them for assuming that would happen here. But it wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen. And so now all of these laws across the state are upheld. And so what happens next? I think our thoughts immediately turn to that. Yes, it's important. It is actually important to celebrate a victory, not because you're it's not about gloating or bragging or anything like that. I mean, gloating, sure, yeah, gloat in the faces of trans activists, definitely. Gloat, taunt, point and laugh at them, absolutely do that. But that's not just what it's about. I think acknowledging and being grateful for victories is important. And also, this is part of the fight. Part of winning the fight is to point out when you've won a battle. It's like we want to send the message to the culture that we're on the winning side. This is the winning side of this issue. Okay, so if you're still defending these quote unquote procedures, if you're still defending this kind of abuse of children, you are not only morally repugnant, not only are you doing it in contradiction of all the facts, but also you're on the losing side. You're a loser. So we're the winners over here. We're winning. And I think it's important to send that message. But then after we're done celebrating, the next step is a federal ban, is a nationwide ban. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has a bill that she's written on this, which would ban these procedures nationwide. And that's what needs to happen. That's the next step. And there's no excuse. We have a Republican-controlled Congress. We have a Republican in the White House. We have a small window of time. It's not going to last forever, but we have a small window. It's now significantly less than 2 years, but you have the small window and you can pass this bill. And this is one of those times when it's always great when this happens, right? When you've got, when the right thing to do, the morally right thing to do, and the politically popular, the politically smart thing to do are one in the same. Doesn't always happen. There's plenty of times when the right thing to do is not the politically popular thing. But this is one of those relatively rare occasions when the right thing is also politically popular. And so there's just no excuse. And I'll tell you this right now, and I say this all the time, it's a basic rule of politics. You don't need to be a genius to figure this out. If you needed to be a genius to figure it out, then I would not have. But it's a rule of thumb, which is in any kind of political battle, think about what your opponents, what your enemies don't want you to do, and then do that. You will rarely go wrong if you follow that path. Think about what they don't want you to do, and then do that. And I will tell you right now that the Democrats in Congress and Democrats all across the country in elected office at any level, they do not want this fight. You think Democrats in Congress want to have to get up and defend the chemical castration of minors? You think they want to have to get up there and actually say, no, yeah, you know what? I think it's a good idea to chemically castrate a 12-year-old boy. I think it's a good idea to remove the breasts of a 15-year-old girl. You think Democrats want to say that? They want that battle? I tell you right now, they do not. Because they know it's insane. They know that it's an incredibly unpopular position. They know they sound like lunatics when they say it. They know it is indefensible. They know all that. They know it. And so what they're hoping is that Republicans are dumb enough to just take this SCOTUS victory as the last word on the subject and move on. That's what they're hoping. They don't want this battle. They don't want it. And so we got to give it to them. That's got to be the next step. All right. As the situation overseas develops, the warhawks and neocons are salivating. Lindsey Graham can barely contain himself. The thought of going to war makes him giddy. There are two things that excite Lindsey Graham, okay? One is going to war, and the other is not women, allegedly. Anyway, but he's been all over Fox News trying to push us into war. And he's also making arguments that, I'm hearing a lot as this argument goes on, especially on X and all the factions. You've got the different factions on the right about this issue and about what we should do about Iran. Should we get involved? And what I'm hearing from some on the interventionist side, what I'm hearing is that, this is not no one is calling for a regime change war. No one is calling for that. No one is saying that we should go to war, put boots on the ground in Iran to liberate them and give them a new regime. No one is calling for that. This is what I'm hearing from some of the interventionists. But then you listen to Lindsey Graham and, well, no, that's exactly what he's calling for. That is, and he's not nobody, okay? This is a, unfortunately, highly influential, national politician. And he is calling for it, for sure. Let's listen.
Can President Trump in any form, can you make the commitment that this would not lead to a longer war?
I can guarantee you that if the Ayatollah gets a nuclear weapon, he will use it. I believe that with all my heart and soul. So the men and women who serve, they're the ones going, not people answering a poll. And if you ask them, would you be willing to risk your life to stop the Ayatollah from having a nuclear weapon? All of them would say yes, because it makes their country, our country, safer. So we live in a world where you got to confront problems. You want to avoid World War III? Learn the lessons from World War II. People in World War II appeased Hitler to the point that it got so much out of hand, we had a world war and 60 million people got killed. So we live in a world where you pay now or you pay later. Let's stop this threat before he gets a nuclear weapon. Let's end this reign of terror. Let's do it now. It's not going to take 20 months, but I can't guarantee you your freedom and your safety unless we're willing to fight for it. I can guarantee you this. If we don't fight for our freedom, we will lose it. I would like to see this regime fall, but I'm going to leave it up to the president as to what to do and when to do it. But I do know this. If we don't take out their nuclear program now, we'll all regret it. We're very close. Be all in, Mr. President, in helping Israel finish the job, and let's see where we're at after we neutralize their nuclear program.
So that is Lindsey Graham doing the thing that people on X keep telling me no one is doing, which is calling explicitly for a regime change war in the Middle East. He wants to send in U.S. troops on the ground to topple the Iranian regime. That's what he wants to do it for freedom. He uses the word freedom. You got to fight for freedom. No, we don't. Not for their freedom. What do you mean? I don't have to fight for Iran. What do I fight for Iranians? No, we don't have to fight for that. And our freedom's got nothing to do with this. Okay, Americans, the freedom of Americans is not at stake in this. It's just not. Okay, let's at least be honest. And I Lindsey Graham is not capable of being honest. He's a bad person. Like he's an evil person. He truly is. A lot of our politicians are incompetent clowns, not necessarily malevolent. Lindsey Graham is malevolent. He's a sinister person. He's never seen a war he doesn't like. He's been in office for 30 years. He hasn't done anything to improve the lives of American citizens, his own constituents. All he does is push for wars overseas. It's the only thing he cares about. He's like a cartoon villain. He's a comically evil person, and I truly despise him. But as for the actual proposal, it's lunacy. And I say again, as I've said several times now, I have, and this should not need to be said. But obviously I have no affinity for the Iranian regime. I'm fine with them all being incinerated. These are evil people. Many of them are currently burning in hell, no doubt, where they belong. Fine. And I also acknowledge, as has been pointed out ad nauseum, that Trump has always been consistent about Iran not getting nukes. He has always said that. That's true. There's no denying that. I mean, he's on the record. He's been saying it for 10 years. Sure. He's been saying it for more than 10 years. Yeah. But he has also always said that the U.S. can't be going overseas to get involved in regime change wars and act as the world's policeman. He's also said that. Which is why the United States should not be getting involved in a war against Iran and certainly should not be engaged in a regime change. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but we should speak up now to make it clear that we don't want it to happen. Because that's the other thing I keep hearing when I'm saying I don't want a regime change war in the Middle East. I hear from people saying, well, what are you talking about? Trump's not doing that. Yeah, he's not doing it yet. I'm saying I've been alive for the last 40 years, almost 40 years, 39 now. And so I've seen this movie many times. I know how this stuff goes. And anyone who's been alive for the last 30 or 40 years, or even the last 20 years, we know how this often goes. And we also can hear people like warmongers like Lindsey Graham explicitly calling for a regime change war, which is why it behooves us to speak up and say, don't do that. We don't want that. Israel can do what it wants. Israel is its own country. But the United States is not Israel, and we're under no obligation to go marching off into the Middle East again to try to create a new government for another group of people. We're under no obligation to do that for Iran's sake, for Israel's sake, for anyone's sake. We have our own interests, which is what we should be focused on. Regime change doesn't work. Flat out, it does not work. Now, self-imposed regime change, sure. Regime change from within, I mean, that can be quite messy too, but that can work. Yeah. A regime change where it's the people of a nation rising up to take back control of their country from a tyrant. That's great. That happens. It can happen. It can work. I'm all for that. From a distance, I'm all for it. If the people of Iran were rising up against to topple the tyrannical regime that oppresses them, I would look off at it and say, hey, good job, guys. Thumbs up. Yeah, I don't think I would not be in favor of a single penny of American dollars going for it. I wouldn't want an American soldier to suffer so much as a paper cut on behalf of the freedom of foreign people. But I still think it's good. I think it'd be a good thing. But a regime change imposed from outside, regime changes by foreign powers imposed on a country, ostensibly on behalf of the people of that country, that doesn't work. It has never worked. Never. It is always a disaster. For decades and decades and decades, we have reaped the bitter rewards of this kind of thing, and it needs to stop. I'm asking, what does it get us? What does it do for us? Okay, like think of an American family in Ohio somewhere. How do they benefit from a regime change war in Iran? The answer is they don't. Not at all. Not even a little bit. What it gets you is chaos, instability, warring factions, and oh, by the way, a whole new flood of refugees swarming into Europe and the United States. That's what happens. It's what happens every single time. And I think at a certain point, when we see a pattern and it like a thing works out a certain way every single time for 40 years, I think at a certain point we could start drawing some conclusions and we could start saying, we should stop doing this. This doesn't work. This is just a thing we should not ever do. Ever. And that's my position on that. All right. So let's see. One other thing. Okay. Well, so the New York Times has this article. Senate Republicans are resurrecting a plan to sell millions of acres of federal land as part of President Trump's giant tax and spending bill, setting up a fight within the party. The proposal will require the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service to identify and sell between 2.2 million and 3.3 million acres of public land across 11 western states to build housing. Past efforts to auction off public land have enraged conservationists and have also proved contentious with some Republicans. A smaller proposal to sell around 500,000 acres of federal land in Utah and Nevada was stripped from the House version of the tax bill. And so that's the plan, to do this for housing. The draft legislation requires that the public lands be sold for the development of housing or to address associated community needs. Now, this is where my environmentalist side comes out, which really shouldn't surprise anyone. The biggest environmentalists in the country are always going to be conservatives who like to hunt or fish. We are the real environmentalists. We just don't call ourselves that because the label has a ton of baggage. The label really means, in practice, communist. You know, like every time it's used, we're talking about a communist, and we aren't communists. And we also don't believe in carbon taxes or any of that nonsense. And we're not worried about global warming. We don't have any climate change superstitions. So we are environmentalists in the Teddy Roosevelt tradition. Back then, they didn't use the term environmentalist. They said naturalist, right? And I think we need to bring that term back. That's what we need to start saying. I'm a naturalist, not an environmentalist. A conservationist, is also a word that's used sometimes. That also is a bit loaded now. It has some baggage, but better than environmentalist. And conservationist, I'm a conservationist too. I believe in conservation of the natural world, absolutely. And as a naturalist, as a conservationist, I really hate the idea of selling off millions of acres of pristine wilderness I really hate it, and I'm opposed to it. Preserving nature, preserving our land, preserving land to, hunt and fish and just to exist, just to have it, even if you're not using it for anything, that really matters, and it's not a small thing. And the idea of leveling so much of that land to build housing is grotesque to me. I really hate the idea. And I'm not convinced that it's necessary at all. I mean, if it was actually necessary, if we really needed to, if we actually needed to, then yes, I would say begrudgingly that, well, you have to. I mean, homes for people must take precedence over nature. People are more important than trees. Although the trees, it's a little bit of a false dichotomy, because the trees and nature and wilderness, they bring joy to people. It's beauty. It's one of the things that makes life worth living. And so it's because human beings have such great value that also nature and trees and wilderness has value. But anyway, if there really was if you had to, if it was actually necessary, then my view on it would change. But I'm not convinced that it's necessary. I mean, there are like 15 million vacant homes in America right now. Now, granted, not all of them are available for sale or rent, but 30+% of them are available for rent right now. And about 1 million homes, I think, are currently listed on the market for sale. And you might say those numbers, especially the for sale numbers, are low. Fine. But is the only solution to sell off millions of acres of wilderness to build housing? I'm not convinced by that. I don't buy that at all. And what kind of housing are we talking about? Are we talking about, because if we're talking about selling off our public land to build mansions and estates for the wealthy, well, I have a huge problem with that. But if we're also talking about selling off land to turn them into low-income housing units, I have a huge problem with that too. Now, there's room in between those extremes, I suppose, but my worry is that it would end up being one or the other. And whatever it is, whatever kind of housing it is, I don't think we need to sell off our land to do it. If we have an issue of needing more housing, I mean, let's look at things like zoning laws that make it difficult to build new units in already occupied areas. Let's look at all the vacant housing in cities across the country. Let's look at, because you might say, well, yeah, there's vacant housing in this city. There's places to live, but nobody wants to live in those places because they are crime-ridden cesspools. Okay, fine, that's fair. So let's look at that. Let's solve that problem. Okay, if our actual population centers are becoming unlivable, and so now the solution is let's start tearing down the forests and to build more housing. How about the area? Well, we're just going to have the same problem again. It's going to repeat itself unless we talked about in the opening. Enforce the laws. These cities do not need to be unlivable cesspools. They really don't. You could turn it around like that. You really could, just by enforcing laws that are already on the books. That's all it takes. And so let's talk about doing that. Let's look at places that have abandoned shopping malls and office complexes that could become housing. There are other solutions, and I don't think we need to do this, and we shouldn't. And I think that this is the kind of thing that conservatives should be against. Now, we're also practical as conservatives. So again, if it was actually necessary, then yeah, you got to make the practical decision sometimes. And it might be unpleasant, but sometimes you got to make a practical decision. I don't believe that it is necessary. And if it isn't, then I think the conservative view on this is, well, it's right there in the title, conserve. And I think, yes, I think that also applies to conservation of the natural world. There are plenty of things that are done in the name of conservation that are insane. Okay, telling us that we can't drill for, it's like telling us that we can't exploit our own natural resources because it might disturb the caribou or some species of tortoise or something. That's crazy. There are plenty of things done in the name of conservation that are crazy, but conservation itself, in theory, in principle, rather, is a good thing, and we should do it. And I think we should do it here as well. All right, let's get to the comment section.
If you're a man, it's required that you grow a beard. Hey, we're the sweet baby gang.
Carl says it's especially weird seeing people get nostalgic for brand names, not just the original stuff from their youth. The Star Wars of today is not the same as what it used to be. Only the name is the same. Moving on is an option, though. My favorite author, John C. Wright, was disappointed by Disney Star Wars and decided he can do better. In my opinion, his current series is doing that handily and a bit deeper than the originals to boot. Yeah, that's the saddest thing about millennial nostalgia, as we talked about yesterday, because the nostalgia is almost entirely for brands and corporate products. They're nostalgic for Full House, for Nickelodeon. And that's why I say that nostalgia is now a product. Even our nostalgia is commercialized, which is sad. I can't speak for everyone, but those of us raised by poor baby boomers lived outside with very little in the way of toys and seeing the world. We're making up for the things we missed out on with what only rich kids could afford. Yeah, well, like we couldn't afford Disney World when I was a kid. We couldn't afford the latest toys and the latest video games and all that kind of stuff. But the idea, and I hear this excuse for Disney adults a lot too, that they weren't able to do this when they were kids. Okay. I mean, so the idea that you're going to go back like Billy Madison and live your childhood in your 30s just because your parents didn't take you to Disney World? That's deranged to me. And it's also a weird thing to lament. Okay, if you had a childhood where your parents didn't buy you fancy toys and didn't take you to Disney World, you should be thanking them for that. That means you had a real childhood. What did you do instead? Were you outside playing in the woods, running around? That's what you're supposed to do as a kid. That's a good thing. It's so weird that anybody would look back and lament the fact that their childhood was not spent with. They didn't spend more of their childhood like playing with fancy toys and going to tourist attractions. It's a weird thing to feel like you missed out on. Matt, if your kids are into Pokemon cards, good luck fighting grown neckbeards in their 30s and 40s at the Pokemon machines, scalping these cards. They have no shame. Yeah, my kids are not into Pokemon, and this is one of the reasons why. Now I'm gonna get in trouble for this one too. Now it's gonna get all these. Now here we go again. Now the Pokemon fans are coming after me. Well, but I gotta tell you, because my kids are not into Pokemon, and I have deliberately kept them away from it. It's not like if they brought a Pokemon card into the house. I didn't call a priest in to do an exorcism exactly, but as a parent, you could kind of guide them towards certain things and away from other things. And that's what we do with Pokemon. And this is why, because the culture around Pokemon and so many of these other ostensibly kid brands, the culture is very adult. It's an adult culture around these things, and it creeps me out. And you could argue that, well, you can't hold that against the thing, like you can't hold it against the show or the whatever, the brand. It's not their fault that all these adults are into it. Yeah, maybe, but still, there's this adult culture around this stuff, and it's bizarre. And that's why I don't let my kids mess with that stuff, because it's weird. Like, it's the same reason my daughters never watched My Little Pony. We never put that on in the house. Now, honestly, the show seems pretty weird to me. I don't know. I've never watched the whole episode, I'll admit, but it's just, that's the other thing. As a parent, it's like you can't sit down and specifically investigate every last little thing, every show, and so you have a radar, right? As a parent, you have a gut instinct about certain things. And so with like My Little Pony, just gut instinct. No, that's weird. That's weird. We don't need, it's too weird. We don't need My Little Pony. And especially because there's this really bizarre, really creepy adult obsession with something like My Little Pony, adult men in some cases, the bronies. I don't know if bronies are still a thing, but they were, at least. And so I just keep my kids away from it, Adults used to play with toys when they were little, but now children just watch TV and have their tablets. They don't play in the dirt. They don't play with trucks or Legos, hardly. Children are done with toys for the most part. It's really strange. No, that's a choice, though. If you raise your kids that way, that's a choice. And I don't know if you're a parent or not, but when I hear parents lamenting this, when I hear parents complaining that, kids today, all they want to be is on their tablets. Yeah, if you let them have that kind of life, then they will choose it. It's hardly even a choice at that age. But if you make that an option, yeah. But don't make it an option. Don't make it an option for them to have a childhood dominated by a screen. All the people getting emotional and getting dressed up at theme parks is ridiculous, but honestly, theme parks as an adult are pretty fun. Roller coasters are the only place normal people can experience positive and negative G in one go. It's a thrill, and the drinking scene at most of these places is pretty cool too. Won't be going to any Disney parks after everything they've done, though. Yeah, look, I'm tough on theme parks, the lines, the heat, the way that everything costs 5 times more than it should. That's what I hate about it. But yeah, I like roller coasters. We took our kids to Dollywood last year, and we don't do a lot of theme parks, but every once in a while, on a rare occasion, we'll take them to one. And I rode the roller coasters with my kids. I waited in the line with them for 4.5 hours for a 60-second ride. But then once we got on the ride, yeah, it was fun. If you can picture me on a theme park ride, I know it's strange, but I enjoyed it. Yeah, I like roller coasters. I'll play, there's all kinds of like child games that I'll play with my kids. I'll play tag with my kids and enjoy that too. They're getting a little too good at it now. Like I used to dominate in tag, but it's a little bit concerning now. My kids will get toys that are fun to play with. My son, for his birthday, just a few weeks ago, got an archery tag set. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Archery tag. It's a bow and arrow, but the arrow has a soft Nerf-like tip. And so it's laser tag, but with arrows. And I know you hear that and you think, that sounds awesome. That's amazing. And it is. And I played that with my sons. It was fun. It was as fun as it sounds. So yeah, adults can still have fun with all that stuff. You get your kids, get them a remote control car for Christmas. And you get to play with the remote control car too. That's a lot of fun. Like the winter time, take the kids out sledding. That's a lot of fun. I'm probably later today, I'll go out on the lake with the kids and we'll play King of the Raft. That game gets pretty, I almost blew out an ACL last year. My son just threw a shoulder right into my kneecap to get me off the raft. Although he didn't, I still won that match. And anyway, all that stuff is fun. I like playing all that stuff. But my point with all of this is that this is why you have kids. That's not the only reason, but this is one of the perks, this is one of the benefits of having kids, is that you can relive a lot of this stuff now as an adult, but you're reliving it as an adult. You're taking part in these things with your kids, and so you're experiencing it from that vantage point. It's a whole new vantage point, and it's a great joy. It's a lot of fun. It's a great joy. But you have to have kids for that. It would be weird. It would be weird if I was hanging out with like 5 or 6 40-year-old men and we went out and played freeze tag. It would be a weird thing to do. It's a weird way for adults on their own to spend their time. If we decide we're going to go play hide and seek, it's bizarre, isn't it? But when you have kids, to play with your kids in that way is a good thing to do. But I think the problem is that you have a lot of adults today who want to skip the having kids part, but then still there's like this circle of life that it's the way it's supposed to go, where you're a child and you become a young adult and then you have kids and now you get to go back and experience a lot of those things you did as a kid again. But like I said yesterday, it's because it's a rite of passage. You're bringing your kids, you're introducing your kids to these things like your parents did with you, and you're experiencing it again from that vantage point. But you're also participating in it and you're having fun yourself. And it's a great joy there. But I think that there's a lot of adults now who want to experience the benefits of that kind of, this circle of life without actually having kids. And, that's where the problems come in, from as far as I can see it. Now, if your idea of gut health is eating a handful of Tums after every meal and hoping for the best, it might be time to level up. Enter Peak's Pu'er tea. Yes, it is fermented tea. No, it doesn't taste like compost. I was skeptical too. But here's the thing. It actually works. I recently tried their black Pu'er. No jitters, no crash, just clean, calm energy that doesn't make you feel like you're on a caffeine bender. And after meals, their green Pu'er helps you digest without feeling like you swallowed a brick. Imagine that. Pu'er is fermented, which means it's packed with probiotics, prebiotics, and all the things your gut needs. but your current lifestyle is probably ignoring. Real clinical backing, real antioxidants. This isn't some powdered gimmick from your local wellness cafe. This is the stuff top doctors like Dr. Mark Hyman actually recommend. Also worth noting, this is high-quality tea, wild harvested from 250-year-old trees, 0 pesticides, no additives, no steeping required. It dissolves in water. That's efficiency. I like efficiency. Now, here's the deal. If you go to peaklife.com/Walsh, you get 20% off for life. Not one order, for life. Plus, they'll throw in a free frother and a glass beaker with their Pu'er bundle. Plus, they offer a 90-day money-back guarantee. So, literally 0 risk. Again, that's peaklife.com/Walsh. Go there now. Your gut will thank you. Probably your brain too. The Daily Wire isn't just ad-free shows or premium entertainment, though, yeah, we've got all that. The Daily Wire is a place for people who are done being lied to, canceled, shouted down, or told to sit quietly while our country is burned down. We fight back with stories, with truth, with action, and when we fight, we win. You're not just becoming a member, you're joining a community that's building the future into something they can't burn down. Join now at dailywireplus.com. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. It's been a while since we've checked in on the theater kids occupying our government. The last time was about 6 months ago when we discussed Ketanji Brown Jackson's decision to star in a play on Broadway. She could barely sing. She couldn't act. The whole thing was an embarrassment, and it made it hard to ignore the fact that at the highest levels, Democrats aren't really interested in governing. Instead, they're interested in fulfilling their lifelong ambition to play a role on a grand stage. They don't care how much they humiliate themselves. They simply don't want to be politicians. They don't want to be political leaders. They want to be Hollywood stars. Based on real events, it brings me no joy to report that at the moment, these failed thespians are now completely out of control. Maybe it's the warmer weather. Maybe it's the fact that Donald Trump's in office. Maybe we've reached critical levels of mental illness in this country. Most likely it's all three. Whatever the case, we have to talk about it because it reveals something about the Democrat Party that they desperately don't want you to think about. And we'll start with the story of the week, which, or of last week anyway, which somehow we haven't talked about at all until now, I think, at least not in any great detail. So a guy named Alex Padilla, who's apparently a senator from California, interrupted the DHS secretary while she was speaking at an FBI field office, started shouting questions at her mid-speech, even though it wasn't time for questions yet. And then when Secret Service agents intervened, he charged towards them. And so, of course, they arrested him. This is probably the best angle of what happened. Watch.
Tried to insert into the city. So I want to say thank you to every single person that has been able to do this.
Hands up, hands up.
Also, I want to talk
Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your...
This isn't exactly the case of the century, especially because political assassinations by leftists are now common. You can't allow some guy to start yelling and moving towards an important government official. Doesn't matter if he's a senator or a janitor. No sane person does something like that. It's an obvious threat. In this case, Alex Padilla is lucky he wasn't shot. And by the way, I cover politics for a living. I had never heard of Alex Padilla until this moment. Frankly, he might not even be a senator for all I know. We're going to need to fact check this. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Hopefully I'm not. In any event, this is such an obvious analysis that even CNN agrees with it. Watch.
First, you have the DHS secretary who is addressing the press. This was not a Q&A period, and she's interrupted. She's interrupted by someone who is speaking very loudly, and so her security detail confronts what we obviously now know to be the senator, and at that point, he is now going to be escorted out. You can't interrupt something like that that's already in progress without having those consequences. But the second incident, in my view, happens the moment as officers are trying to lead him out, he then turns and walks back towards kind of into those agents. At that point, from a security detail perspective, we're taking this person out against their will. We've asked the person, and again, this is all happening very quickly, but the moment he then turns into them, they realize this is not someone who is going to comply.
Now, you might think that because Alex Padilla's stunt failed, and even CNN concluded his behavior was indefensible, that he would just slink away in shame and humiliation. But that's not what happened. Instead, several days after this incident, even though there's a potential war in the Middle East looming and literally everyone else has moved on to more important things, Alex Padilla stood up and delivered a tearful monologue that he'd been rehearsing for hours in front of the bathroom mirror. It's one of the most pathetic displays by a member of Congress imaginable, and here it is.
You've seen the video. I was pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance, I was forced to the ground. First on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, why am I being detained? Not once did they tell me why.
That may be the hardest clip to watch that we've ever played on a cancellation. It's certainly up there, at least. It's worse than serious car accidents, for sure. The car that got hit by the train because the woman driver backed up into the tracks and then ran away, as bad as it was, is nothing compared to this in terms of the incompetence and sheer cringe on display. This is probably a good time to point out that Alex Padilla has never had a real job. He's been in politics his entire life. He doesn't accomplish anything, never has. He's probably never interacted with a normal person. And in that sense, this speech kind of makes sense. If you're surrounded by a bunch of hopeless phonies, then you might think a performance like that would convince normal people. To give one example of the people Alex Padilla spends his time with, here's Cory Booker reacting to this whole episode. We played some of this before, but it's worth enduring. Well, it's not really worth enduring, but we will anyway. One more time. Watch.
And this son of Mexican immigrants who cleaned homes and served food, this man with equal dignity in this body, today was driven violently to his knees, as if made to kneel before the authority of the executive, because he was so-called disrespectful. That should offend the consciousness, not just of the other 99 members of this body, it should offend the conscience of this country. Because if you could make Alex Padilla forcibly kneel before this executive, when does it stop? He's a United States senator.
Watching that, you're wondering how they could possibly think this will convince anyone. The acting is just so bad. They have no facts to support anything they're saying. And on top of that, these are the same people just a few months ago who told us that nobody is above the law. That's how they justified arresting the leading presidential candidate for fake crimes. And now when Alex Padilla is arrested for a crime he commits on camera, the defense is, how dare you? He's a senator, for God's sake. Again, people who are actors, people who are only capable of reading from a script, aren't fazed by this obvious inconsistency. They don't think, they just do what they're told. This Alex Padilla stunt was scripted in every conceivable way. After it happened, the talking point went out to every politician and media personality. This is how they plan to sell it to the public. Check it out.
And anyone that knows Alex Padilla knows one thing about Alex Padilla. He's one of the most mild-mannered, decent people you'll meet.
I know Alex Padilla to be among the most mild-mannered of colleagues.
And Jamie is right. He is very mild-mannered. He's not the type of person who would necessarily do this.
People who may not be familiar with Senator Padilla, he is one of the most mild-mannered, nerdy, soft-spoken.
Who thinks of him as anything other than a reasoned, reasonable, mild-mannered senator.
That's a montage that was put together by Western lensmen, and it's important to show it because it's actually encouraging in a way. It's more evidence that the propagandists in government and in the media are really, really bad at their jobs. They're not capable of thinking on their feet. If they were capable of independent thought, they'd realize how badly Padilla had bombed this stunt and they ditched the script. But because they're essentially robots, all they can do is press on. It's like watching a Roomba continue to vacuum even as the whole house burned down around it. Just doesn't know any better. Neither does somebody named Brad Lander. Like Alex Padilla, he's someone that no one's ever heard of until 5 seconds ago. He may not even be a real person. Who knows? According to various reports, he's some sort of official in the New York government. He's apparently running for mayor and is not polling well at all. So he needs attention. And the other day, what do you know? He got attention by going to an immigration court, locking arms with a suspected criminal alien that ICE was trying to detain, and interfering with the arrest. And again, it's all on film because Brad Lander needs an audience. That's what the whole thing is for anyway, and here it is.
Judicial warrant. Do you have a judicial warrant? Do you have a judicial warrant? Can I see the judicial warrant? Can I see the warrant? I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it? Where is the warrant?
I have my hand here.
You obstructed. You obstructed.
I would like to go see the warrant. Let go. Take it to see the warrant. Put him in custody. No! Take it back. Take it back. Take it back. Take it back. Step back. You don't have authority. You don't have authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Sir, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens. You don't have to. I'm not obstructing. I'm standing right here in the hallway. I asked to see the judicial warrant.
Once again, it's an open and shut case. He's clearly impeding federal authorities to get attention to his failed political career. He should be charged with felonies and thrown in prison immediately, just like Alex Padilla. No reasonable person can watch this footage and come to any other conclusion about it. But again, just like with Alex Padilla, the Democrat machine is pretending that we don't have eyes and ears. So here's Kathy Hochul, a woman who, when you watch her and listen to her, makes you wish you didn't have eyes and ears. Here's what she had to say.
You want to know what I really think? Please. It's bull. How dare they take an elected official who's been going down there for weeks to escort people who are afraid to walk into a courthouse in the United States of America, because despite them having legal status and following the rules and making their appointments, that they don't know what's going to happen to them. So Brad Lander has stepped up to be a guiding help for them. And this is what happens to them? What the hell is happening to this country?
Now, it's often very tempting in this business to attack people for their personal appearance. And very often it's gratuitous and unfair to do so. And it's something I never do, except for all the times when I do. But, in this case, as you listen to Kathy Hochul deliver this extremely unconvincing performance and spout obvious lies as if we don't have videotape proving that she's wrong, you really can't ignore the fact that Kathy Hochul is both physically and spiritually deformed. She is a monster inside and out. And like every other failed actor in the party, she's incapable of selling her fake indignation, in part because her face can't really move. And to the extent that she was trying to sell a narrative, no one was even remotely convinced by it. They were all too distracted by whatever that was that they just watched. And that said, despite themselves, all of these performances by Democrats, as embarrassing as they are, do convey an important message. It's not the message Democrats intend to send, but it's an important message nonetheless. And that message is that despite the rhetoric of every Democrat politician in the country, we do not live in a fascist dictatorship. The fact that these people would deliberately commit crimes on camera and get arrested is proof we're not living in a fascist dictatorship. Instead, it demonstrates very clearly the Democrats know that they won't face any serious consequences when they violate the law in public. Try a stunt like that in North Korea. See how that goes. Within 24 hours, you'll become a target dummy for artillery practice. Try a stunt like that in the United States, and you get a bunch of weepy MSNBC anchors telling everyone how mild-mannered you are. Maybe that needs to change. Maybe these people should suffer some real consequences. Maybe not North Korean consequences, but, closer in that direction. But in lieu of such punishments, as justified as they would be, we'll have to settle for mocking these politicians as ruthlessly as we possibly can. And that is why Alex Padilla, Brad Lander, Cory Booker, and every other failed actor in the Democrat Party posing as a serious politician are all today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
John Bickley here, Daily Wire Editor-in-Chief. Wake up every morning with our show, Morning Wire, where we bring you all the news that you need to know in 15 minutes or less. Join me and my co-host Georgia Howe for daily coverage of all the biggest stories on Morning Wire.